creating a tombstone is more complex than just sandblasting letters onto a slab of granite. Designing memorials involves helping families of the deceased, or people looking to plan their own resting places, figure out the best way to represent a whole life in a single, permanent monument. Here are 13 secrets of memorial engravers that we gleaned from the experts. 1. There is no normal. Clients don't necessarily know what they want right off the bat, and they may even feel overwhelmed by the sheer breadth of the possibilities. A lot of families come in and they bring up the S-word, standard, explains Vince Diogardi, the president of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania Area Rome Monument, a company founded by his great-grandfather in 1932. There is nothing standard. Even the preferred size of a memorial can vary vastly from client to client. What seems tiny to one person might seem huge to another, and vice versa. And so a monument designer will sit down with clients and discuss the person the memorial is for, including their hobbies and interests, their family, and other aspects of their lives, then come up with ways that life could be symbolized in stone, or another material. The end result is always unique. 2. Process can take years. Everyone deals with death differently. Some people want to decide on a memorial immediately after a loved one dies, while others might take years. Even just signing off on a contract can be an emotional step for someone who's grieving. The most important thing you can do is give people the room to process their grief. Greg Lundgren of Seattle-based Lundgren Monuments, which focuses on cast glass memorials, says he's come up with ideas for clients who then went dark on him for 2 years before moving forward on the commission. It usually takes him just a week or two to come up with preliminary drawings, but he and the client might go back and forth for up to a year discussing dimensions, prices, and other factors before the client is 100% sure about the design. Then Lundgren drafts up a contract, and typically finishes up the memorial in 6 months or so. Diogardi estimates that crafting a memorial takes around 8 to 10 weeks at his company. First, however, customers typically come in for 2 or even 3 consultation visits where they learn about the process, talk about design ideas, decide on something, and finally come up with a contract. 3. So they often feel very close to their clients. In the course of creating a monument, you become very deeply engaged with the family, Lundgren says, much more so than you would in any other sort of designer-client relationship. Talking about a deceased loved one and trying to come up with a design that will adequately capture who they were as a person is naturally more intimate than if you were designing, say, a piece of furniture or a new kitchen. The process can create a relationship that lasts beyond the scope of the project itself. I have families in other parts of the world where if I were to visit that city, I would completely go visit them and have dinner with them, and I know that I would be welcome, Lundgren says. 4. Clients often try to cram too many motifs on one gravestone. One of the most important parts of my job is to remind people that there's no way they can capture a real person in a piece of stone, Lundgren says. Clients often want to incorporate as many symbols of their loved one's life as a stone can fit, requesting that the designer incorporate an image of their college mascot, and their truck, and a dove, and a photograph of them, and a poem memorializing them, for instance. But that impulse can mean the memorial ends up looking like a NASCAR vehicle, with all the company's sponsors on it, Lundgren explains. His biggest advice is to follow the old adage, less is more. 5. Family disagreements are a challenge. One challenge memorial designers face is that families often don't come to unanimous decisions. Everyone has an opinion, Lundgren explains. It's a hard thing, especially when you're faced with the legacy of a person and it is so permanent. It's not like buying a shirt. While a family might be able to agree on the size, shape, and color of a monument, they often get hung up trying to decide on the specific text that should be included. 6. A number of their clients are still living. You don't have to leave your gravestone's design up to the people who outlive you. You can choose something for yourself before you go. It's extremely common here, Diogardi says. It's called pre-need. That way, there's no guessing or arguing among your family members about what you might want, it's already determined. 70 Why don't only memorialize humans? When asked about the most elaborate memorial he has ever designed, Lundgren described not a huge tombstone or complex statue, but an urn he made to memorialize a dog. Ruth was a stray Australian shepherd his client found on the street, and when she died, he was heartbroken. To honor her memory, Lundgren created a bronze and stainless steel urn. Ruth had one brown eye and one blue eye, so he incorporated two semi-precious stones, one brown and one blue. I think it was the fanciest urn I've ever made, he says. The result is an urn that looks more like a piece of modern art than a memorial for a deceased pet. If you lost something you love and want to pay your respects to it, I'm going to approach it with that same sense of humanity, he says, whether it's a person or a pet. 8. They're not always chiseling by hand. How your memorial is made depends a lot on who you commissioned it from. Lundgren doesn't consider himself a stone worker. He labels himself a designer, and says much of what he does is really graphic design. Basically what you're doing is creating line art, he says. Most engraving is not done the old-fashioned way, like hand-chiseled and chipped away. I'd say probably 99.9% is formatted on a computer, cut as a stencil, and then sandblasted and carved into the surface. Diogardi disagrees with that assessment. A lot of consumers think this is all machinery-based, he says, but not all firms rely entirely on stencils and computers. Rome Monument uses an automated sandblaster for lettering, but also uses chisels and other tools to create designs by hand. If a family comes in and asks for a gravestone with a rose on it, one of their sculptors will actually carve that rose into the stone freehand. 9 Why you can buy a memorial from whomever you want. Just because you choose a particular cemetery or funeral home doesn't mean you have to buy a headstone or monument directly from that company. Cemeteries that do sell memorials make the consumer think that they have to purchase a memorial from the cemetery, Diogardi explains, but that isn't the case. You can commission a memorial from any designer, and then have it delivered and installed in that cemetery. Both Diogardi and Lundgren design and ship memorials to cemeteries all over the country. Lundgren, in fact, has designed memorials for installation all over the world. There's a lot of funeral homes and cemeteries that will show families a very narrow slice of what's possible. They'll say, pick something out of this book, Lundgren says. I think it's important for families to remember that there's no limitation on what can be done. 10. Some designs can be very elaborate. Just because he advocates for less is more, doesn't mean Lundgren thinks all memorials should be simple grave markers with minimal text. He has designed memorials shaped like giant boomboxes and unicorn heads, hot pink headstones, and all manner of custom sculptures. Whatever that consumer can think that they want to do, we can design it, Diogardi explains. That goes for the industry as a whole, not just his firm. There's a monument in Vermont that it's a full-scale Mercedes-Benz made out of a single block of granite, he describes. The only thing that truly limits what kind of memorial you can design for your loved one is your budget and your imagination. But they have to conform to a cemetery's rules. Cemeteries do have some say over the type of memorial you install at your loved one's final resting place. A cemetery is like a condominium association, Diogardi explains. While you may own the gravesite itself, there are still certain rules you have to abide by. Specific motifs typically aren't off-limits, but designs are often restricted by size, material, and sometimes even by color. These restrictions can even vary within cemeteries. In one cemetery Rome Monument has worked with, for instance, some areas are restricted to bronze monuments, while monuments in another section have to be granite. Recently, a customer called to inquire about buying a memorial for a family member, but didn't know where in that cemetery they were buried. We had to make a couple phone calls to the cemetery to find out where this family's loved one was laid to rest so that we know what type of monument that we could design, Diogardi says. Some of these rules stem not from cemeteries looking to strong-arm customers into buying monuments from their own catalog, though that's an issue, too, but from real concerns about how certain materials age. It's always a good idea to have restrictions and rules to make sure a cemetery is going to age well, Lundgren says. Many rules were developed in the 1920s and 30s to keep people from installing materials that would quickly deteriorate, like wooden crosses or metals that would rust. But those rules haven't necessarily kept up with new technological advances. The large-scale cast glass memorials Lundgren makes are only possible because of computer technology that wasn't commercially available until the 1990s. Part of his job is simply educating cemeteries and funeral homes about what long-lasting materials are possible. 1-2 cars are a surprisingly popular motif. The guy in Vermont who was memorized with a giant Mercedes-Benz sculpture isn't a total outlier. A fair number of people ask to somehow incorporate cars or trucks. While many of Diogardi's clients request memorials that incorporate themes like faith, family, hobbies, and career, Lundgren says he's created multiple memorials that somehow involve vehicles. Strangely, I've gotten more cars than I would have thought, he explains. He suggests that it could be a demographic pattern. A lot of the work we do is for younger people, and when you have someone who's 17 or 19 years old, and the family is trying to recall what's important to them, cars are often a lot more important to teenagers than if you're 60 or 70 years old, he says. He also receives a lot of requests for birds, flowers, and butterflies. 13. Working with death isn't always sad. As depressing as it might sound to be a monument designer, it's really amazing, Lundgren says. While most aspects of dealing with the logistics of a loved one's death are stressful and depressing, figuring out a way to memorialize them permanently is actually a positive process. To be able to be that one person that can talk about beauty and art and legacy is really powerful, he explains.